On your screen from New York City this morning is Lauren Leader. She's the co-founder and CEO of All In Together. Ms. Leader, what is your organization?
So All In Together is a nonpartisan women's civic education organization. Since 2014, we've been working to train women across America on the core tenets of how our democracy works and to give women the tools to get off the sidelines and become community leaders, citizen advocates, and leaders on issues that matter to them.
Are you training them to run for office?
Not expressly. You know, a lot of the women that we work with have never been involved politically really in any way. They may have voted, but they've never done anything else. And part of what we think is important is that women, no matter who they are, where they live, what their party affiliation may be, what their economic circumstances are, that they are communicating their perspectives, their interests, their issues to their elected officials. And women have really not done that as effectively as men over the years. They're less likely to write to their members of Congress, to lobby, to become citizen advocates and activists, and that's what we really want them to do. We've certainly had women go on to run for office. We encourage that, and then we'll connect them to resources if they're interested. But really at the core, we're trying to mobilize lots and lots of women, whether they're ready to run for office or not, to have a voice in our political process.
I want to get your thoughts and show our viewers what happened earlier this week at the debate, before the debate, and then at the debate, the last debate before the Iowa caucuses. Senator Elizabeth Warren is asked about her meeting with Bernie Sanders back in December of 2018, where he allegedly, she claims, said a woman could not win in 2020. Lauren Leader, what was your reaction when this question was raised and this debate was taking place?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Warren was smart in a bunch of ways in this whole exchange, and I think she certainly won the soundbite war of the debate with this comment. Part of what was smart about this is that in 2016, gender was a huge sort of unspoken factor. Certainly, Hillary was willing to carry the mantle of, you know, the groundbreaking nature of her candidacy, but she was always somebody that was, to some degree, uncomfortable with facing gender politics head on. And I think Warren recognizes that we're in a different time, that in a post-Me Too world, in a post-Women's March world, in an environment where women are outvoting men, following the 2018 election where women won in such huge numbers on the Democratic side in the congressional races, that gender and gender politics are red hot. That women on the Democratic side of the aisle are super passionate about this question. And the other part of it that in some ways was, I thought, masterful, is that there have continued to be questions about Bernie's commitment to gender equity, not just because of whether or not he said that a woman can or cannot win, but because of the behavior of some of the men on his campaign in the 2016 election. There have been consistent accusations against him that he did not take seriously sexual harassment among some of his campaign staffers. There has been this sort of ongoing question about this. And right before this all happened, Bernie had his staffers go out with a letter. He wrote a letter to his staffers saying the very thing that Warren attacks in this after the gender piece, which is that he claims that she cannot bring new people into the party, which is exactly what she goes on to take on. So, look, the fact is that gender politics will continue to be red hot all the way through Election Day on both the Democratic and the Republican side. And by putting it out in the open, she really surfaced issues that are on a lot of people's minds.
What about the hesitation of Iowa voters who are about to vote in a couple of weeks, hesitant to vote for a woman because they're afraid of that person having to go up against President Trump?
Well, look, what the data shows in all the surveys, and including surveys that we did just a few months ago at All In Together that were national surveys that looked at how women see this and how men and women see this. Both men, women, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, et cetera, say that they themselves would vote for a woman. The concern is they think their neighbors will not. In other words, they think that women do face a bigger hurdle in terms of mobilizing the electorate. And by the way, we saw very similar trends when Barack Obama was running. This question of, would my neighbors vote the way I will? I'm comfortable voting for a black president. And in fact, Barack Obama won Iowa. I'm comfortable voting for a black president. I'm just not sure that my neighbors are. And I think, look, I think Warren's likely to do very well in Iowa. Whether or not people vote for her, gender is inextricable for any woman candidate. It is always a factor. But I do also think in this case for you, she's not the only one. There are two women in the field. And I actually think that Klobuchar is going to do very well in Iowa. Her numbers are rising there as well as in New Hampshire. So there's not a single binary choice, which makes it possible for voters to look at this in a more nuanced way than they were able to in 2016, where they were faced with just one. So, we will see. I think that fundamentally Americans are ready to vote for a woman. I think they did it in 2016. The question is it the right woman? Is it the woman that they want? Is it the woman that they believe can win? And that's where it starts to get really complicated.
All right. We'll go to Robert, Frostburg, Maryland, Independent.
Good morning, Greta. How you doing?
Morning.
Yes, ma'am. My heart weeps. I'm a 76-year-old Vietnam veteran. Many of my friends in my war, as well as other wars, died in the preservation of our belief in this country. Abraham Lincoln said, "A nation divided against itself cannot stand." We have done that once before, and it led to a civil war. We need to start talking to each other instead of entrenching in one side or another. This country is too precious to be divided and destroyed the way we are doing right now. It must come together like Lincoln said, or we will perish together. I pray to God, and I hope everybody out there pray that this division will cease. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for your service, and thank you for your devotion to the country. And I agree with you, and I've spent a huge part of my life working to try to help bring people together. I wrote a book in 2016 called Crossing the Thinnest Line that talks about the importance of diversity to the country, but also, more importantly, the importance of Americans finding a path to more meaningful mutual understanding and to reaching across dividing lines. It's why I run, even though I'm personally a Democrat, why I run a nonpartisan, a bipartisan organization. Everything we do at All In Together, we do with both Democratic and Republican women, and that's really important to me, even in this very polarized time. And I think we all have a role to play, whether that's having a more civil discourse with our neighbors or looking for opportunities to find common ground with people we think we have nothing in common with. I think it's never been more important, and I agree with you. And thank you again for your heartfelt thoughts.
From that, we'll go on to Jerry in Rogers, Minnesota, Republican. Jerry, we're talking about women in politics. Go ahead.
Hi. I find it hard to believe you can run a woman in politics seminar or whatever you are and not have politics be involved in it. You're not sitting there trying to, what would you talk about if not my view as a Democrat is this and my view as a Republican is that? How do you run?
Okay, Jerry.
Well, I appreciate your perspective. I will say that is, as a man, I appreciate that you feel that it's too much identity politics. As a woman, I want to see in a democracy representation in elected office of people who are representative of the nation, who understand my life experience, who bring that perspective. I think that's critically important. It's one of the fundamental bedrocks of our democracy, that it is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's not dividing people up into categories. That's saying that it's important that our elected leaders not all just be white men. And I think many Americans agree with that. The Democratic Party is incredibly diverse. Our nation is incredibly diverse. We will be a majority nation in our lifetimes. And in order for us to have a government where our representatives fully understand the life experiences and perspectives of all of our citizens, we need diversity in leadership. And I think it's fundamental. And you can't have that if you gloss over. We are all human. We are all obviously united as Americans. And yet we have different experiences that we bring to the table that are based on who we are. And that is critical, that we have that perspective in elected office.
Lauren Leader, how is a female candidate perceived while she is running for office, and how does that change once she is elected to office?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no question, and there's just reams of evidence that women candidates face an array of complicated issues that men don't face. First of all, there's a funding issue. Women candidates do struggle to raise the same level of money that men do, in part because I think men assume that mostly women donors are going to support them. Men are not as interested in supporting women candidates, and so they face a funding gap. You actually see this. It's interesting because Elizabeth Warren, you can look up which of the candidates, the gender breakdown of the contributions to each of the candidates. The candidate that has the most male donors is Andrew Yang. The candidate that has one of both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have much more diverse donor bases. But the other factor is the ongoing questions that women face, the double jeopardy that they face around their personality, around their looks, around the way they speak. It goes on and on and on. It's all very well documented. That said, I do think that we are at a turning point. And what we saw in the 2018 midterm elections was a record number of women who ran and won. And when it comes ultimately to women in the race, women are as likely as men to win when they run. But until now, we've had a real deficit in terms of the number of women candidates versus the number of men. So we saw that in the 2018 election, when lots of women stepped forward to run, they won at the same rate as men. It drove a large surge of Democratic women. Unfortunately, on the Republican side, Republican women are really struggling right now. There are only 13 women left in the House of Representatives, 9 women in the Senate, 4 of whom have been appointed. They were not elected to their current office. They were appointed. So there are serious challenges on the Republican side for women running that is a whole other segment we could get into.
Mm-hmm. We'll go to Richard in Boulder, Colorado, independent.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for being on this morning.
Morning.
I'm so surprised that we haven't had a woman president in this country. You know, Europe's done it over the years, and I think women do a much better job taking care of the earth. So I'm just hoping the woman in Kentucky takes out McConnell for the Senate.
That's a really interesting Senate race. Thanks, Matt. It's a super interesting Senate race. So a couple of things. There are 59 countries that have elected women heads of state ahead of the United States. Many of them are parliamentary systems where the president is chosen by the party rather than by popular vote. If we had that system, Nancy Pelosi would have been president many years ago. Our system is much more complicated, and I think it does create some higher hurdles in a way for women to get elected as head of state. Interesting race in Kentucky, a real uphill battle for Amy McGrath. I think she's captured certainly a lot of national interest, has raised huge amounts of money, but it's definitely a challenging race there. There are a bunch of other places in the country where there's some really interesting dynamics. There's a Senate race in Kansas with a woman running who was a Republican, Barbara Bollier. She was a Republican. She changed parties a couple years ago. She's a doctor. She would be, the first woman senator in a mostly till now red state, although they just elected a woman governor there. So there's some really interesting races to watch with up and coming women around the country.
Lynn, June Lake, California, independent. Good morning, Lynn. You're on the air with Lauren Leader.
Good morning. Yes, I live in a town of less than 4,000 people, and I actually ran in 2016 for our county supervisor seat.
Good for you.
And the attacks against you from the opposing party just were so completely, it just caught me off guard because I've lived here my whole life. I run a business. I raised my kids. I sat on a school board. Very active. People know me. And so when you say, women won't get in or we need to support each other. And, I just really didn't expect it because it was from people that knew me for so long. So I won't run again. So I think maybe that's where a lot of it is. If just the attacks on people, the lack of support. There are no women on that board. Yeah. And I'm a business owner. It's all retirement and government employees. So I'm not really sure. I guess I'm really disgusted about black, white, women, men, this group, that group. Everybody's divided, and it just seems like, what's the Hispanic population? What's the black? What's the Asian? What's the women? Instead of just like everybody's an American.
Okay, Lynn.
I think there's a couple things there. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, look, so I'm really compassionate to the first issue. I actually just got elected to public office myself in my town in Westchester County, New York. I am the only woman on my town board. Like you, it's a small town, and there were no women, and I decided to run because I thought it was important and I had something to say, and I was attacked relentlessly, but I also gave as good as I got, and I do hear you. I hope you'll reconsider. We need women not to back down. There's no question that women face intense scrutiny and that politics can be really tough. But when you believe in something that's greater than yourself and you believe in your own voice, I think that helps. So I'm very compassionate about that. I get attacked on a daily basis in my town because people disagree with me. But I also know that I'm there to represent all of the people in my town, and I believe in what I'm doing, and I'm very glad that I did it. I hope you'll think about doing it again. But we all have a part to play in the discourse, but there's no question that women do face heightened attacks, and I think a lot of women stay away from politics because of that. We can change it, but we have to be present in order to do that.
Robert, Roanoke, Virginia, Republican caller.
Yes, Lauren, how are you today?
Morning.
Good morning. I don't think women of any nationality will have any problem being elected. I think what affects them more than anything is their political philosophy. I'm calling on the Republican line, and so there's a lot of things that I firmly believe in, and I don't see that coming from the other side.
Well, Robert, let's take that point. Lauren Leader.
Well, look, I mean, women are as diverse as the nation, and we don't all agree. There are women of every political perspective, belief, stripe, background in our political process, and we don't all agree with each other, and men don't all agree with each other. It's not because we're women that we're all going to agree. But I do think representation matters, and I do think that there is something incredibly important about a perspective that a woman brings to elected office and to our political process that matters, no matter for all Americans.
Rick in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Rick, good morning on our Democratic line.
Good morning. I just have something very short to say. I'm a former military officer, a former federal agent, a former CPA, actually a retired CPA. And I can tell you in my 45 years of experience, my best employee and my best manager were women. So I don't see what all the fuss is about this. I think women are very competent. They can easily do as good a job as men.
Well, I agree. I'm glad you feel that way. I mean, what all the fuss is about is that when you look at the statistics on how women are doing in American society, the statistics don't bear out the kind of your perspective. So what do I mean by that? The United States right now is rated, sorry?
No, go ahead. We're listening to you.
The United States right now is ranked 86th in the world by the World Economic Forum for the political parity of women. We're 52nd overall in terms of gender equity. Women, even though we're the majority of the college degrees, are still vastly underrepresented in leadership in pretty much every discipline and industry. So the wage gap continues to persist. So when you look at virtually every measure of how women are doing in American society, on the one hand, we're doing exceptionally well. On the other hand, we're really far behind many other countries in the world in terms of women's full and equal access to the American dream. And, the vast majority of minimum wage workers and Americans in poverty are women. So we have some serious challenges, and I think that's part of why women are so animated today is because those contrasts are so great, and women are very conscious of them. 43% of women say that they have experienced discrimination at work. That is an enormous number, and that speaks to the challenges that we still have and the work that needs to be done to achieve real parity.
David, Lakewood, New York, a Republican. Hi, David.
Hi. Yeah, I just have a couple questions, or actually I have questions almost more than anything else. But in terms of women, as far as being president, I don't see where there's any issue there at all. I would think the last presidential election would make it clear that that's not an issue anymore. do wonder about just the coverage a little bit in terms of Mayor Pete, to be quite honest. I was sitting there watching the debate, and there's all this discussion about whether a woman can be president, and I would think that a bigger issue for this election would be Mayor Pete and his sexual orientation.
Look, I mean, I think it's a really interesting issue. It's not what I thought you were going to say about Mayor Pete. I thought you were going to talk about the fact that he's has so little experience, relative to the women. But you're right. I mean, the fact that he's gay, you know, it has come up. He has raised it many times, and it certainly has come up in the course of the race. It's really interesting when you look at the data on how Americans feel about gay rights, about gay Americans. There's been a vast shift in public attitudes around this over the last 20 plus years. We now have the vast majority of Americans who believe that gays and lesbians should have full and equal rights under the law. There's overwhelming support for gay marriage. Do gay Americans still face discrimination? Absolutely. Of course they do. We have 37 states where it's still legal to fire somebody for being gay. But public opinion on gay rights has really shifted dramatically. And I think that Mayor Pete benefits from that. I think as he continues in his campaign, if he continues to do as well as he has, I think this will continue to be an issue. And there are clearly folks across the country for whom it is a problem, it is an issue, or it is something they're uncomfortable with. But I think it speaks to the comfort that Americans have with gays and lesbians on the whole, that it has been less of an issue in this campaign than you might expect. I think this is very personal for everyone. No, gender to me does not trump all other issues in the sense that I look at the totality of a candidate, not just their gender, and I think most people do. But these are not mutually exclusive concepts. In other words, I can advocate for the fair and equal treatment of women when they run for office. I can encourage women to participate in our political process. I can believe strongly that it's critical that we have the representation of women. But that doesn't mean I'm going to vote for every woman that runs, and it doesn't mean that I agree with all of them. We would never ask that question of a man. But because we have so few women candidates, these are the kinds of questions that we get asked. And I think it's in a sense a false choice. But I appreciate your question. Thank you.
Howie in Philadelphia, Republican.
Yes, good morning. I can't help but notice that from the school board all the way to the legislative branch, we have about thousands of women. And
so, unfortunately, you're not correct. I understand that you think that there are so many women in elected office. It's not correct. There's only one state in the nation where women are even 50% of the state legislature, and that's the state of Nevada. Almost nowhere else do they even break 30%. That's true at the municipal level in almost every major city, and it's true at the state level in almost every single state legislature. The average nationally is about 25%. We are still not even 30% of Congress. So the reality is that women are still underrepresented in elected office. It may not seem like it on the surface, but those are the numbers.
Lauren Leader, what is the impact of Virginia passing the Equal Rights Amendment? A long time to wait is the headline on the Washington Post, and Virginia becoming the last state needed to ratify this amendment.
Yeah, I mean, it was a symbolic victory. It has obviously some legal implications, and for activists, it was a very sweet moment, not just because of the passage of ERA, but because it was made possible by the historic wins of women in the Virginia state legislature, including the first ever woman speaker. So there's a whole set of factors there, the flipping blue of Virginia, and then the representation of women in the Virginia legislature. I am skeptical, unfortunately, and I'm someone who's advocated for ERA my entire life. I'm skeptical that this is a moment where ERA is going to progress. I think there's enormous both legal and constitutional hurdles and questions about whether or not ratifying at the 38th state, more than 20 years after the amendment was working its way through the states, will hold up in court. But it is an important time to be bringing these critical issues to the fore. Americans do need to understand that today women do still lack significant legal protections and are not legally considered full and equal citizens in the United States Constitution. And that is a conversation we should continue to have.
If it passes legal muster through the courts, and becomes part of the Constitution, does it have legal ramifications for who runs and who represents America in our legislatures?
Well, it has vast repercussions for sure in terms of a whole host of legal issues that affect women, everything from equal pay to family leave. I mean, there is sort of an endless array of issues that potentially get impacted by this. I don't think it has a direct impact. I may be wrong. I don't believe it has any direct impact on the representation of women. We don't have quotas. There's no call for that in the United States. I think it doesn't necessarily directly impact that.
All right, we'll go on to East Orange, New Jersey. Democratic caller, Uchenna.
Hello.
Morning.
Hi. Yes, this is Uchenna. I just wanted to make 2 points. I mean, early on, a gentleman called, and we're talking about now we have this president in the presidential election where Hillary Clinton lost. Had she had won, we would not have been dealing with any of this nonsense. She has far more experience than Trump, far more intelligence, and I'll leave it at that. And the second point is the presidential people that are running for president now, the Democratic Party. Pete Buttigieg, if he was a woman, she wouldn't been able to have gotten that far. He has no experience. He's a failed mayor. And we need more women in politics because women bring a great deal of intelligence, fundamental intellect, and a wave of intrinsic value to our nation. And we need to be done with this. And women, if a woman is qualified, should be able to run, she should be able to win. That's my take.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. And all I can say is I hope you'll go out and volunteer for a campaign of a woman that you believe in, and go put your, energy where your beliefs are. I think that's going to be really critical. And, this is one of the challenges in this country right now, and certainly a challenge with the current presidential cycle. We had 5 women on the Democratic side, and we've lost, 3 of them. 2 of them really because of funding challenges, because of the sort of nature of the way that the Democratic structure was set up in this cycle. Both Kamala Harris and Kirsten Gillibrand had to drop out before even a single vote was cast. And that's in part because of the massive funding gap that they both faced and because of the super high hurdles that were set by the Democratic National Committee for getting on the debate stage, even where there were so many of them that were so impactful before we've even had a single vote cast in Iowa or anywhere else. So I think it's problematic, and I think we need more Americans to do more than just say, I believe a woman should win. I think we need more women in elected office. They got to work for it. That's how our democracy works. It requires participation. And I hope more men will step forward to support women candidates, and that all Americans will start looking for ways that they can make a difference on this.
Lauren Leader, do you think that the DNC should have tweaked their rules?
I do think that the hurdles for the debates were really incredibly high in ways that empowered the wealthiest candidates to find a level of success and stay in the race longer than candidates who had experience and less money. What the DNC will say, and they have been saying this relentlessly, is that no candidate who polled lower than 5% in the last 20 years has ever gone on to be the nominee. It's a false equivalent because, in fact, we've never had this many candidates on the Democratic side run. It is a completely different environment because of the money that is required. And it's a totally different scenario because we have several billionaires in the race who are able to skew the entire system. I think the DNC is going to look back on this and realize that it was a mistake to set the hurdles so high that so many candidates had to drop out this early. Americans are thoughtful. We are capable of having a debate of ideas with a lot of different voices in the mix. And at this point, the field has narrowed so much, and we haven't even had the caucuses in Iowa. So I think it's a really unfortunate outcome. I know a lot of people agree, certainly candidates like Cory Booker do. He really disproportionately, was harmed by this current system, as were many of the folks who are, I think highly qualified that have something to say, also feel that way. So I think there's going to be a reckoning on this down the road. There were other options that we could have, that should have been deployed.
Lauren Leader, co-founder and CEO of All In Together. You can learn more if you go to aitogether.org or follow on Twitter @LaurenLeaderAIT. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Great show.